Okay, I would like to call this meeting of the Urbana City Council to order, Monday, August 5th, 2019. Will the clerk please call the roll?
City Council members Brown.
Here.
Hazen. Hersey.
Here.
Jacobson.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Roberts. Wu.
Here.
Mayor Marley.
Here. Next up is approval of minutes of the previous meetings, the July 15th joint meeting and the July 15th meeting. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Eric. Are there any corrections? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. That motion passes. Under additions to the agenda, I've had a request to move item 4 under new business to follow item 1, and that's to accommodate a representative who's here from Indianapolis, and I'll give her a chance to get on the road a little bit sooner. Is there a motion for that?
I'll move approval of moving the item.
Second.
Moved by Jarek, seconded by Sharice. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, so we'll move item 4 up to be the second item we consider under new business. Public input, I have cards from two individuals. First is Eldris Melinda Carr. She wishes to express continued concerns about the Dr. Ellis subdivision sewer issues, equity, and historic impact. And then we have a card from Reverend Dr. Evelyn and Bishop King James Underwood regarding the Dr. Ellis subdivision sewer concerns. They are continuously concerned about the Dr. Ellis subdivision sewer problems. Does anyone else wish to address the Urbana City Council? You'll need to fill out a green sheet. Okay. All right. We have one presentation scheduled tonight, and that's an update on UC2B. So come on up. Yeah, it's under public input. So Mike Smeltzer is here, and will anyone else be speaking tonight? Will anyone else be speaking tonight?
Paul Hickson is here, who's
Okay.
one of your appointees to the UCDB board, and Brian Olson is here. He's the general manager for I3.
Okay.
You may have some questions for him
Okay.
or for Paul after I'm through, but
So you've got the expert panel here. Okay, great.
I brought wingmen. Well, thanks for having me. I was contemplating having a little more time than what you'd like me to have, so I'm going to go fast, and you may see some things on the slides that I don't address stereo as much as I might otherwise. I will provide you with my written comments because they're all complete English sentences, and you can read them, well, mostly complete. The very short version is that we are 10 years into this project. I know that seems impossible, but it's true. Federal and state grants paid for most of it, which is good. We built what we said we would build, and it works. And it works the way we said it would work, which is always nice. Through private funding and partnerships, the UCDB fiber network has continued to grow. And as we look to the future, the UCDB not-for-profit will remain focused on expanding the fiber connectivity to all of Urbana and Champaign and on enabling everyone in our community to take advantage of this fiber infrastructure. However, that may not be possible to do that with just volunteers. We're close to the edge of what an all-volunteer organization can get accomplished, but we can talk about that some other time. Some real quick history. Some of you were not involved in the City Council at all when this got started, and actually back in the 90s, Larry Smarr from NCSA got the ball rolling. He said, hey, this thing called the Internet's coming, you guys ought to do something about it. The Chamber of Commerce got involved, did some things about it. In 1997, I sat right here and tried to convince the Urbana City Council to adopt something called CUNET 2000. Silly me thought it would only take 3 years to build a community fiber network at that point, and that was where the name came from. That didn't work out so well. We had a nice map. We had different networks. We had CopNet, we had GovNet, we had EduNet, we had MedNet, BankNet, and BizNet, and Skynet was one of our original sponsors. Back then, there was something called the Champaign-Urbana Cable Commission. and they had a subcommittee called the Broadband Access Committee. Danielle was a participant in that. I guess she's taken off, but and their charge was to figure out how to improve broadband in this community. Around that same time, I was involved in that because I was at the university as the director of networking. Around that same time, EDUCAUSE, which is kind of a consortium of major research institutions, had a white paper, and they basically said, hey, it'll take $200 billion to do it, but we ought to wire up every home and business in the country and just call it over. At the time, they thought that we should pay for it, or should be paid for, with the federal government, state governments, and local governments doing a three-way split of that $200 billion. I heard that, I brought that back to the BAC committee, and they said, well, that's interesting, but we'll never get any money from Springfield, we'll never get any money from Washington, let's split it with the two cities and the university. That's a three-way split. And so we were kind of talking about that. And then the election happened in 2008. And it turns out that one of the people who had read that white paper was Barack Obama. And so he put money into the stimulus legislation specifically for broadband. We found out about that and did some research. I attended some meetings, and we hired a consultant. And on the day that Barack Obama signed that legislation, authorizing all the recovery money, but also the broadband money, Joanne Hovis was here at the iHotel speaking to about 150 people about what we could do to take advantage of that once it became available. One of the catches of that was that it required a 20% local match, and that was kind of a challenge because we were talking about some big money, and 20% of big money is still big money. At the same time, the state of Illinois came out with a matching program. Pat Quinn was very much a broadband supporter, and they put some money up that we could use as 10 per a half of our local match. So instead of having to raise 20%, we only had to raise 10% if we got the state support. We had to do a whole presentation to them and get approved. To make this all happen, Urbana, Champaign, and the university formed an intergovernmental consortium. Basically, we took the founding documents for MedCAD and put in UC2B wherever MedCAD used to be and changed a few words, and that became UC2B. And there was a very specific purpose for it. It was to get these grants and then to administer them and make it happen. The university was always going to be involved in managing the grants because that's something the university does very well. Champaign and Urbana were involved in administering the construction and then maybe doing the operations for the resulting network. We won 2 grants, one for $22 million from the federal government, one for $3.5 million from the state government, and we raised $3.4 million in local matching funds. Some of that was from the cities of Urbana and Champaign. Some of that was from the University of Illinois, the Mass Transit District, the Illinois Century Network, a regional network called Serban that's based out of Bloomington, Champaign Telephone Company, which is now Consolidated Communications, they were one of the contributors, and a company called PEG Bandwidth, which has now been owned by Windstream, that provides connectivity to cell towers. They all those organizations prepaid for long-term leases of fiber. Because they all had reasons to have fiber and they needed to connect various things to each other. We hired contractors, got started, we had a big groundbreaking. Some of you can find yourself in this picture. I see some people looking. I'm even in that picture. I was able to get Daryl Holman from the News Gazette to take it for us. We built grant-funded infrastructure, and we had really 2 halves of the project. Half of it was building rings throughout the city, which I'll spend some time talking about. But the other half was doing fiber to the premise, or fiber to the home, as people like to call it. And that happened in 11 primarily low-income neighborhoods. We did that after doing a door-to-door survey that was administered by none other than Mary Alice Wu in her role at the university, and found out that we had a series of neighborhoods that had less than a 41% adoption rate of broadband at that time. That was the federal government's cutoff for funding for fiber to the home. So we did fiber to the home in those areas, and we also built the rings, which allowed us to provide services to 256 anchor institutions. And we'll talk about anchor institutions a little bit more. Why do we do fiber to the premise? There's wireless, there's other solutions that are out there. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and today, fiber remains the only technology that's going to be with us. Our children and our grandchildren are going to benefit from the fiber we put in the ground 8 years ago. It lasts that long. They'll put different electronics on the ends of it over time, but the fiber itself is going to be useful for a very long time. The cities own the right-of-way, and that's where the fiber is. So we didn't have to get a license from anybody to use broadcast or anything. We didn't have to build any towers. We didn't have to attach anything to telephone poles. It's all in the right-of-ways, and it's all fairly simple as those things go. Real quick, this is what the rings look like on paper. They don't come out looking nice and pretty like this. But there were basically 3 rings that are predominantly in Urbana. There were 4 rings that are predominantly in Champaign. All of the rings come back to 2 different nodes on the university campus. And then there's routers at those nodes. Those routers talk to each other. So there's the opportunity for each of these anchor institutions, for this building, for a fire station, to have dual connections to the network. So if there's a fiber cut on one side of the ring, you don't care, because the other side of the ring kicks in and just keeps on working. Some of the network that the City of Urbana had built prior to this, it didn't have dual connections. It had a single connection. And depending on where the fiber got cut, you could lose half your school district. And it might take a day to get it fixed, which is not real convenient for anyone. We did fiber to the premise, and this doesn't show up really well. The rings, the fiber to the premise zones are yellow on that map. They should look better on that screen than they do on this one. And you know your way around town, and they are primarily in low-income areas, although they weren't chosen because they were low-income areas. They were chosen because they had less than 41% broadband adoption. There's a strong correlation between income and broadband adoption, so that didn't surprise anybody. We had 256 anchor institutions. That's a lot of anchor institutions for a community this size. We changed the federal government's definition of an anchor institution. They said you could have schools, you could have medical facilities, you could have libraries, you could have public safety buildings. And then they had an other category. They didn't define what other was. So we said, okay, other. What did Congress say we should be doing with the money? Congress said we should be using this money to serve vulnerable populations. Well, what's a vulnerable population? Really old people are kind of vulnerable. Really young people. People who are disabled. People who are homeless. People who may have emotional or mental issues. And we have an awful lot of agencies in this community that work with all those broad groups of people. And those people got fiber connections. And that was, we were unique. Of all the projects that were funded in the entire country, we have an awful high density of anchor institutions in a fairly small area. You can't see this list, but you'll get a copy of this. And this is the old one, but there they all are. And when you look at it, you'll see that an awful lot of agencies you might expect: Crisis Nursery, the Urbana Connection Center, a neighbor, a lot of people looked at me 10 years ago when I sat here and said I was fairly crazy, and they were right. But they weren't right that I was crazy about this, because we built it and people are using it and they're doing good things with it. It was kind of, if you build it, they'll come. Well, if you build it, they'll use it. And people are using it, and it's only going to get better over time. That's a four. Well, Charlie's in there. How about that? This is the ribbon cutting when we had our very first anchor institution ready to go. I see some people I recognize. There's Carol, former mayors, current mayors, lots of different people. Around the same time that, well, I'm getting a little out of order here, but there came a time when the city of Champaign decided that they did not want to operate the network. If you think about the culture of both Urbana and Champaign, we don't do utilities. We don't do garbage, we don't do electricity, we don't do water, we kind of do sewer, but not really. And so doing broadband kind of there was some support for it, but it really wasn't going to flow. So we were, the Intergovernmental Consortium pretty much said, well, you need to find a private partner to do the operational stuff day to day, because the city of Champaign doesn't want to do it anymore. So we formed a not-for-profit corporation, and it looks a lot like what the old Intergovernmental Consortium used to be, in that the cities and the university appoint people to it, and it runs things and manages it. The city's current appointments are Paul Hickson, who's here tonight, Landy Najaro and Jason Berg are your other two. Some past council members have been on the board, Brandon Bowersox, Carol Ammons, and Charlie. And a lot of you know Pete Resnick. He was around for a long time on the board. We found a private partner in 2014 called ITV3. They were owned by the same people that own Family Video. Good folks. They came in here guns blazing, did some things in the first year or two, and then kind of decided they want to be acquired, and the construction kind of slowed down. They were acquired. We had some fairly complicated contracts that were involved, and it took a while, and we lost some construction years doing that. But now I3 Broadband has bought all the assets of ITV3. Brian was with ITV3, now he's with I3. He didn't have to repaint the trucks quite so much. And you can see on this map quickly what the yellow areas or the orangish areas are what the grant paid to build in terms of fiber to the home. The blue areas are what was built by ITV3 and I3, and I think I've got, yes, this is really just the Urbana sections and gives you a little better idea of what it looks like in Urbana. There's a lot of Urbana that now has, either through the grant or through what I3 has done, that has fiber to the home, and that's good. Why did Urbana invest 10 years ago in this project? You had some fiber, but you didn't have everything connected. The North Fire Station wasn't connected to fiber. King School was not connected to any of the other schools. You didn't have redundant connections for any of the buildings on here. And there was also some concern about what's going to happen with Olympia Drive and High Cross Road in terms of connectivity going forward. There was some discussion about maybe a fire station way out north or way out east. And it'd be nice to have fiber available to serve that when the time came. MedCAD was one of our investors, and when we look at some of the ways that other organizations have benefited from this, they now have a remote operations center over in Champaign. Well, you may not like the fact that it's in Champaign, but it needs to be in Champaign. It needs to be as far away from the one here as it can be, but still be on the same fiber network, because you don't want it to be on the same part of the power grid. You don't want it to be on the same part of the telephone grid. If something really bad happens in East Urbana, you don't want to lose 911 for the county, and having it being in Champaign gets that done. Having fiber make it happen, it might as well be next door, because it happens that quickly. Any of you use Siri or Alexa? A lot of times when you ask Siri or Alexa questions, you're talking to UC2B Fiber, because Wolfram Research is providing the answers to those questions, and they're connected to the world over UC2B Fiber. Little known fact. Sanitary District and MTD both are using the fiber. I never thought the Sanitary District would be a big customer, but as it turns out, they have pumping stations throughout the community. They have treatment plants. It's a bad thing when the pumping stations and the treatment plants get out of sync with each other. I'll leave that to your imagination. They used to connect this with phone wires and sometimes with little cell phones and things, and it didn't always work real well. Sanitary District put in fiber into 9 of their highest volume pumping stations, and they don't have those kinds of issues anymore. I think they're actually looking at doing some additional locations. The Mass Transit District was planning on doing some interesting things, and they're continuing doing that. They bought fiber throughout the community. When you're in a bus shelter, it's kind of nice to be able to figure out when the next bus is coming by, or if you're not familiar with the community, if you're sitting here and you want to go there, to be able to figure out what that route's going to be. They have interactive terminals that do that. Those terminals need to talk back to the servers. Fiber helps that happen. Probably more importantly for a lot of people, they have video monitoring a lot of the shelters now. If you're sitting there late at night, it's nice to know someone's watching you, and hopefully that will deter bad people. The biggest change for Champaign-Urbana, and especially Urbana actually, has been the competition. A lot of you have UC2B fiber now, but many of you don't. And even if you don't, there's competition now. And there are places in Urbana that have 3 different fiber to the home providers. There are communities in this country that would kill to have 1 provider, and Urbana's got 3. What's that do to price? It keeps the prices low. What's that do to service? Hopefully, it keeps the service levels high. It's been a long time since AT&T or Comcast has raised their rates on things around here. There's a reason for that. There's competition now. If you're a business in Champaign-Urbana, you have 7 different options for fiber providers. Some of those are UC2B based, and some of those are just companies that didn't get involved with UC2B until it was too late to get involved, and they went out and built their own fiber. Or some companies like Comcast and AT&T, they always build their own fiber. But you have a lot of choices as a business, and anyone who's on UC2B fiber can get multiple providers over that fiber. So competition has happened in a big way in the business community, and it's happened certainly in a big way, much more in Urbana than Champaign at this point, in terms of fiber to the home. Back in 2009, when we were funded, there were things that we asked for that were not funded, and that's really a lot of the focus of UC2B these days. We had 2 different proposals to do digital equity things, training, helping people learn how to use computers, how to use the network, educational purposes, vocational purposes, job training, you name it. Neither of those proposals were funded, but the needs didn't go away just because we didn't get the money. So UC2B tried to do some things in order to leverage what we did have money for, and one of those ways was doing all the anchor institutions. Because if we got all those places connected, that opened the door for connecting more things, and that happened. Doing the fiber to the home, we were only one of 2 projects in the entire country that tried to do fiber to the home. We were pretty unique in that. It was a big challenge, and it was a challenge. I used to have darker hair. But nonetheless, we did that, and the areas that we did would have been the last areas that an incumbent provider would have done. They would have chased the money. They wouldn't have built in these areas because these are not high-income areas. And we did those areas first, so we got them done. I got those ones done with the grant money. Again, that is going to hopefully make a difference to the lives of some of the people that live in those areas. We created something called the Community Benefit Fund. We gave out awards starting last year, actually. Paul Hickson was running the Community Benefit Fund, and this is a list of the award winners last year. My favorite last year was the Urbana Neighborhood Connection Center. Janice was just getting that started back in 2009 when we did this, but I'd heard about it and people were talking it up, so we made sure that the Urbana Neighborhood Connection Center got connected. There's fiber that runs right by them, and it may not have run right by them had she not been there. They didn't use it right away, but now they're using it and they're kind of liking it. But we have this recurring program. We have regular donations every year for another 5 or so years, I believe. Maybe not quite that many. From I3, that was built into our contracts. We're in the process of having a subsidiary that's a 501c3, so that if you wanted to, you could give a tax-deductible donation to the Community Benefit Fund. Because we gave out 8 awards, but these were not big chunks of money. They helped these organizations. We could have helped them a lot more if we had more money. And the money we gave out last year was actually several years' worth of donations that we had gotten initially. So the Community Benefit Fund is really going to be a lot of the focus of UC2B going forward. If we look towards the future, I3 Broadband is going to continue to operate the network and to continue to expand the areas that get fiber to the home. Our agreement with them laid out a kind of a plan that said in the next 6 years you need to pass 22,000 single-family homes. They're determining which homes they go by. Our math at the time said if they went by 22,000 more homes than they were already by, that was going to be pretty much a lot of the community. We have an awful lot of apartments and things that aren't single-family homes, and a lot of those apartments are already taken care of when it comes to internet, but single-family homes weren't. So they're going to continue to do their thing, and I think we're 3 years into that agreement, and the first 2 years they did the number of homes they were required to do, and they're well on their way to doing them this year. The UC2B NFP will continue to advise I3 Broadband. We meet out at their place once a month. We'll continue to administer the Community Benefit Fund, and we'll continue seeking additional funding for the Community Benefit Fund from other sources. There are foundations and organizations that look at digital equity as being an issue that they like to fund. And I think we've got a good story to tell, and we're going to continue to do that. The Intergovernmental Consortium still exists. The members appoint the current UCDB board. Each agency appoints 3 people. And probably our big question going forward is, will we get to a point where the consortium perhaps has a general manager that is funded somehow? We have hit some roadblocks over the last year, just because we are a total volunteer organization, and we've had some people who have had personal issues that have taken them away, and we're not very deep. So some things that we'd like to have gotten done in the last year haven't gotten done, not because people weren't willing to do the work, they just couldn't do the work for one reason or another. And it may be a general manager is something that we will come back and talk about at some point in the future. It's an idea that's percolating. Those were none of my prepared remarks, but just reading to my slides, and I don't know how long I went, but that's
I think
it.
we'll take questions now.
Wonderful, and I hope these guys will help me answer if necessary.
Thank you, Mike. Bill?
Yeah, I was trying to remember how the Community Benefit Fund is funded now. When the I3 sale went through, it seemed like there was some continuation of a percentage or a dollar amount every year. Is that still going? Is that
Yes, that's
going
that-
indefinitely, or is there an expiration time for that?
Not
think-
indefinitely.
I think Paul wants to answer that question.
Yeah, he's the guy.
Yes, the agreement with I3, and they have done a marvelous job both of building out and of helping keep this community benefit fund going. But that obligation ends at the end of December of 2022. So 3.5 more years of monthly payments, and that disappears, and that's $50,000 per year.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Sharice?
So, and I'm asking this, of course, because my mom has I3BB. So you're saying in 3 years, it'll be privatized, or what's going to? I'm trying to understand. I
Okay.
wasn't here when any of this.
Right. So UC2B is the organization that basically got the grant.
Mm-hmm.
And as Mike was explaining, Ms. Hersey, that after a decision was made by all 3 parties, the university, City of Champaign, and City of Urbana, that none of those parties wanted to run an internet service provider.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want to be an ISP.
Right.
Then we had to go find a private partner.
Okay. So
The first
I3B.
partner we found was ITV3,
Okay.
and then that company was sold, and now our new private partner is I3.
Mm-hmm.
A condition of the sale, of us giving them the rights to use the fiber that we'd gotten through the grant,
Mm-hmm.
was that for a time period, they had to contribute to this community development fund,
Okay.
community benefit fund. And those terms changed a little bit between our agreement with ITV3 and our agreement with I3 Broadband.
Mm-hmm.
I3 has been the most generous, but that time period, from the time it was originally agreed to the end, was 6.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
It took place over 7 budget years. And at the end of that time, they are no longer under an obligation to help fund the community benefit fund. They will continue to manage the private network.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the IRU, the indefeasible right of use, is actually owned by UC2B.
Yeah. The fiber is on a 20-year lease.
Okay.
I mentioned before there were private companies, like the City of Urbana, for instance, has strands of fiber. on all those 3 rings that are in Urbana, and also actually one of the rings that are in Champaign. Why would you want fiber in Champaign? Well, the library wanted to get to the Heartland Library office up in North Champaign, because when you check out a book from the library here, it had to talk to a server that was in North Champaign.
In
making
Douglas
that-
Branch.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But those are all 20-year leases, and those 20-year leases started in 2014, I want to say. So they go on for quite some time. And we have, the not-for-profit has a 20-year lease for like 80% of the fiber with I3. And they're using that fiber under the terms of that lease. And the terms of that lease were that they were going to build and invest a lot of money in this network, as well as provide money to the Community Benefit Fund. And they also provide a small amount of money for just the operations of the NFP. I mean, we have attorneys and, you know, all the same things everybody has, but we have attorneys and accountants and whatnot, and we have to pay them somehow. So that's not necessarily going to change in terms of who's running the network or how it's privatized. Nothing's really changing that. It's just the funding for the Community Benefit Fund is most likely going to change at the end of 2022.
Yes.
Now, it's possible, and I'm not trying to put any pressure on it, it's possible that I3 may say, okay, we'll do this for longer than that. But it's also possible they'll say, oh, that was our commitment, and we'll do that, and that's that. So between now and then, and we've got some time, obviously, we're trying to position ourselves to be able to go to the Gates Foundation and say, hey, look what we're doing in the community, we're helping people learn how to use technology and so forth. We'd like $50,000 from you, or we'd like $500,000 from you, whatever.
Oh, $1 million.
Don't ask small, I guess.
That's right.
So that's it. There's nothing really bad happening at the end of 2022, other than their contractual obligation to donate to the Community Benefit Fund ends.
Okay, so how will this, they're not contributing to the CBF, will that affect the cost, the bill that they get from I3 TV or anything?
I wouldn't
No.
think so.
Because I know there are a lot of people in.
No relationship.
No relationship at all, okay. So the IBF, my question, I guess, is the IBF helps to connect the fiber to particular institutions, or?
It hasn't. There have been people who
Subsidizes
have
the
approached
cost?
us recently and said maybe that would be a good use of it. That either subsidizing people's connections, I'm pretty sure if you live, well, you've got fiber.
Yeah.
You didn't pay a fee to get connected, did you?
No, I did not.
Okay, so they don't charge there's no charge to get connected as long as it's already in your front yard. And what I3 is committed to do, or contractually obligated to do, is to put fiber in front of people's homes, and they're committed to do 3,500 of those private or single-family residences, build it in the front yard. And it's their policy not to charge
year.
every year for the next several years. So that's going to grow. These areas of the map that were blue, you're going to see more blue.
Okay.
And there'll be more blue by the end of this year. They don't telegraph what they're doing because their competitors sometimes do weird competitive things if they know where they're going to go next. So no, it shouldn't have any effect on that.
Okay,
I would say the only thing that and this is for future discussion, but as I look at the university, as I look at the city of Urbana, and I look at the city of Champaign, all 3 entities have some interest and some resources that are put toward the issue of how to help underserved members of the community use technology to improve their lives. Digital literacy, education, youth at risk, elderly population. And my suggestion is that at some future date, we all think collectively together about whether or not there might be some advantage in the original 3 parties doing a more integrated way of planning together to address those needs.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
Two questions. One, is fiber essentially immortal? Once it's in the ground, it will last as long as we will anyway?
Unfortunately, no. Freeze-thaw cycles have a bad effect on fiber. It gradually gets cloudy the more times you freeze it and thaw it, freeze it, thaw it, at least the older fiber. There's some fiber that's in use today that's 30 years old. Typically, IRUs were done for 20 years because when fiber was first put in the ground back in the late 80s, Corning and the companies that made it thought it would last for 20 years. They keep improving it and doing different ways of making the glass. Nobody really knows exactly how long it's going to last because you can't anticipate that. But the fiber that's in the ground here, it's all in conduits. If the fiber that's going down High Cross Road were, let's say it got cloudy overnight and stopped transmitting light, you open up one end of the conduit, and you open the other end of the conduit, you pull out the old fiber, and you pull in a new one. You don't have to dig up anything. There's manholes there. It was all done knowing that it might even grow. You know, we someday may run out of strands. Let's say Urbana grows like crazy going east, and somehow you get 20,000 new homes over there. Well, we don't have enough fiber to accommodate 20,000 new homes, but in that same conduit that has a cable that has 216 strands, you can put a cable that has 532 strands. And the strands are so small that the cables don't get much bigger when you do that. And so it's upgradable if it needs to be.
So the maintenance costs of keeping up the existing fiber network are very, very low. It's a very tiny fraction of
The
what we're
biggest
talking about.
cost is actually Julie. Anytime you go to plant a tree or the city puts in a new curb, you know, you call Julie to see what's underground. Well, I3 now has an account, or works with Julie, and you guys do your own locates, don't you? Correct. They do their own, but a lot of them use a company, I'm not thinking of their name. USIC, thank you. AT&T and Comcast use the same company that goes out and does that, puts little flags in your yard and so forth. That costs them, well, they do it in bulk, but it's probably about $10 a visit per utility.
Mhm.
And when UCB was an ongoing operation that the city of Champaign was managing, the bill from Julie every month was the single biggest expense, just to protect that asset that's in the ground.
Okay.
And we've been really, I won't say lucky, but we've been fairly fortunate. There are close to 200 miles of fiber throughout Champaign-Urbana, and there have been very few fiber cuts.
Okay.
Now, I had to say that, didn't I? I'm sorry, I didn't mean it.
So my second question is, do we know what fraction of residential units in Urbana still do not have fiber to the unit?
No, we don't. Champaign, I'm doing one of these updates for Champaign. Champaign has a slightly, I'm going to say, more granular GIS system than Urbana does. You're all part of the county system, but the data that you put into it in terms of what the buildings are and the building shapes and all that. In Champaign, when you look at, and you go on to the county site, you can actually see the outline of all the buildings that are in Champaign. I don't think you have that in Urbana quite the same way.
Wow.
And I don't know that you have the same granularity of which is a duplex, which is a triplex, which is a fourplex. This is an MDU building that's got 32 units and whatnot. That's a really hard, I wish I could tell you that number, but it's a really hard number to come up with. Mark Tolson, who is the IT manager for Champaign, who used to be the GIS coordinator for the county, he's working on trying to produce that number for Champaign. He was actually asked to do it for both Urbana and Champaign, but he's not sure that the data exists for Urbana. And it's a big collection. It's a big investment of somebody's time to generate that data in the first place. And I don't think Urbana has invested in that at this point.
It's a standard, or let me ask this, is it standard procedure now for when a significantly large development goes in for a new development for fiber adequate to bring it to all the units, goes in automatically, like the ones that are going up here in Urbana this year and next year?
No, we tried that with the Housing Authority. There was a new complex just immediately to the east of the STEM Academy that's actually in Champaign. It's right on either side of Wright Street.
Talking about Booker T. Washington School?
Right.
Yeah.
There was a new Housing Authority complex that was built right to the east of that.
Yeah.
And we worked very closely with them. This was back during the grant. And we put fiber to each building, and then we did Ethernet cabling within each building. So each unit had, I think, a fiber outlet in the living room, one in the bedroom, and maybe one in the kitchen. And some people took advantage of it, some people didn't. Some of the contractors didn't like, these were union contractors from someplace else other than here that were doing the work in some cases, and they didn't like this other thing going on at the same time.
So, I mean, we've had a number of new developments come in front of us, and like right north of here on Vine Street, the Gather project, which is going to be going up next year, and so forth. And so they're not sort of automatically bringing in fiber adequate for all the units.
They're not necessarily, but there are things that developers can do to make it easy. And it's maybe just as simple as designing a telecommunications room in the basement and putting conduit from that telecommunications room out to a manhole out at the curb. I mean, I3 would love to, I'm sure, work with any developer because Brian knows, he doesn't know off the top of his head, but chances are there's already fiber very, very close to those two developments you're talking about. And it's just a matter of how do you get it into the building is one of the biggest challenges, especially with a big building. And if you plan for it ahead of time, and when you're pouring concrete, and you just put a conduit in and bring it out to the street, that makes it easy for everybody.
So I have to say that as these developments were coming before us, I certainly was not being mindful of that issue, and I will be in the future.
And it's an easy thing to ask them. If I were king for a day and I'm running Urbana, I would require it. That you do multiple conduits, and not just for I3. You want to make it easy for AT&T, for God's sakes. You want to make it easy for Comcast or Volo or whoever may want to provide services there. Running some conduits out to the street and don't making technology and communications an afterthought is just good business.
We can look in to see what the situation with that is.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me it's in their interest as a marketing thing if every unit has
I would think the
high-speed
market
fiber.
would dictate the fiber to that building, to those
I
buildings
would
in particular.
Think so, but probably should check.
We'll check. We have time for one more question or comment. Yes.
Okay, so Eric stole my question, so I'll just make one comment. So I worked on this original grant back in 2009. We did the grant.
It was.
July. It was the craziest time of my life working on this grant.
Yep.
I would like to just say we finally got fiber to our home last year after
Good for you.
10 years of working, waiting for that fiber. We lived in the donut hole, so I'm
Yep.
very happy to have it now.
Brian was instrumental in filling the donut hole. So, thank Brian.
Well,
Thank you.
And I would like to thank you both, and Brian as well, for your dedication and vision and persistence over the years. I came on the council in 2009 in May, and you've been at it ever since. So
We have.
anyway, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Charlie, I will make this a little more easy to reproduce and send them to you. Yes, because you really got the Cliff Notes version here.
Thank you.
Thank you for limiting it to Cliff Notes.
Well, there were some good jokes in the regular version, but.
Unfinished business, we have none. Are there reports of standing committees? Reports of special committees? Reports of officers? All right, we'll move on to new business. First up is ordinance 2019-08-039, ordinance approving major variances, 802 North Goodwin Avenue. Lily Wilcox, planner extraordinaire, will be presenting.
Good evening. Getting ahead of myself right there. So, for tonight, there is 802 North Goodwin Avenue. The applicant is, it's pretty hot, right here, Gustavo Batista of 802 North Goodwin Avenue. He bought the property this spring. He has applied for a conditional use permit, which was granted July 17th, 2019 at the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. With that conditional use permit, tried on the same night, was two variances in order to use the existing parking lot on the property. The property, one variance would be to allow parking in the front yard on the B1 property. There's two front yards that face Hill and Goodwin Avenue, Hill Street, and the other variance is to allow 3 parking spaces to be provided rather than the 4 parking spaces that's required in our parking requirements table in Article 8, Parking and Access. Zoning Board of Appeals voted unanimously to recommend approval for City Council on July 17th. There was a very robust public input portion of the meeting. It was collected for and against the case. There were 24 letters of support that were collected in support of the case from Mr. Batista. There were 12 signatures that were collected against the case from Mr. Mosley. I'm going to go through and show a little bit about the property. So here you can see the property. This is commercial land use. This is a parking lot for the elementary school that's to the north, King Elementary. You have a single-family home that is no longer rented, despite what the land use code from the tax assessor's office says. Single-family home, and duplex. And then lastly, I want to share, this one doesn't sound like it's on. The proposed site plan, which is right here. We've got the existing building, fenced storage area, and then you've got a solid 6-foot fence on both sides, except right here when it's closest to the Hill Street side, which would be 50% 4-foot fence. This is all outlined in our zoning ordinance, and it's required when you establish a use on a B1 property. For the parking, it was very tricky. This property is the size of a residential lot, which is kind of for the character of a B1 zoning district. You have 3 accessible parking spots right here, which will allow for a one-way access aisle. So that took a lot of tricky maneuvering. There's some very few other ways to handle that situation, but most of them would end up at providing other kind of complications. So. And really quickly, I'm going to go through a couple of the staff findings. Does it sound like this mic is on? Yeah. Hello. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Thank you. Staff findings. Number 1, Gustavo Batista was granted a conditional use permit by the ZBA to allow a contractor shop with a showroom at 802 North Goodwin Avenue in the R3 single and 2-family residential zoning district. Let's change that really fast to R1. Neighborhood business zoning district. Number 2, Mr. Batista has also requested a major variance to reduce the amount of parking required from 4 to 3 spaces and a major variance to allow car parking in the required front yard. Number 3, the variances will allow the existing building and existing concrete pad to be used. Number 4, the variance request will not serve as a special privilege to the property owner if granted, as there are special circumstances relating to the land, such as location of the existing building and parking lot, and the size of the lot. Number 5, the property owner did not deliberately create this situation, as the building has been in this location for decades, and the owner just recently purchased the property. Number 6, the variances will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood as vehicles have routinely parked there on the existing pavement. Number 7, the variances will not create a nuisance as this use will be a much lower intensity use than the previous gas station and will renovate and reuse a building rather than encourage it to fall into disrepair if it remains vacant. And number 8, the variances represent a minimum deviation from the zoning ordinance as only 3 parking spaces are needed for the business and are replicating historic parking patterns on the site. The City Council has options. City Council has the following options. Number 1, approve the variance. 2, approve the ordinance variance for an, well, you guys get it. Number 2, approve the ordinance with certain terms and conditions, and if so, articulate all terms, conditions, and findings. And number 3, deny the ordinance. Recommendation. At its July 17th, 2019 meeting, the ZBA voted 6 ayes and 0 nays to forward the major variance to City Council with the recommendation to approve the requests. City staff likewise recommends approval.
Is there a motion, and then we'll discuss?
I'll move approval of the staff recommendation to approve this ordinance.
I'll second.
Ordinance number 2019-08039, moved approval by Eric, seconded by Jared. Are there technical questions for Lily? Mary Alice.
So I just wanted to clarify, in your presentation, you said that there were 21 people in support from the neighborhood and 12 that were not in support. But then in the exhibit, it's mentioned that there's no statement in terms of the intent of the position for the 12 signatures. So we don't know if those 12 people were in support or not in support. Is that correct?
That is, yes, that is very true. And there, one thing to note for that list of people and signatures that was presented to ZBA as against the case, one of those people showed up to talk to ZBA about the case and stated that they were neither for nor against the case during that. So,
Did they say why they signed a piece of blank paper? I'm just curious if they gave any insight into why they signed that.
That question wasn't really, that wasn't forwardly asked like that, but she did mention what she was there to discuss, which was when the property was vacant for many, many years, many people in the neighborhood had used that parking surface as a parking lot just for auxiliary storage from their house. And one day when Gus Batista took ownership of that property, he put notices on people's cars saying, please don't park here, liability stuff. And she wanted more of a notice to that. I will say, when Gus Batista bought the property and came to the city of Urbana and mentioned what he wanted to do with it, we knew that we were going to need a conditional use permit, and we asked him very politely not to put up signs or start running a business out of that property before he gets the proper approvals. So that might also be something that we'd kind of set up saying, no signs, and when she would really appreciate a sign.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Any other
Okay.
questions? Charisse?
Yeah, so I know that this piece of property used to be a gas station / candy store / hangout on some levels. I'm not understanding exactly what Mr. Bautista is. What is the business that will be run?
Right. So our table of uses has contractor shop with showroom. It's really going to be a contractor shop. But that was the closest matching item on our table of uses to line this up for B1. What he's planning on using the property for, and Gus Batista is here tonight, so he can.
Could you come and give us
Yeah.
a more accurate description of what your plans are, just so that I can? That used to be Don Harlow's.
Good evening.
place.
My name is Gus Batista. I live in the neighborhood, and I'm an electrician. And so basically, it's going to be where I can go and do my books and look at prints. And I live 2 blocks from it, so that way my wife can keep an eye on me. And that's kind of what I'm going to do there. Store my ladders and.
Okay, so
and-
it's going to be more like a storage space for And I guess a place where somebody can call you for your services?
Yes.
Okay, and you'll be keeping your wiring and your cables and your ladders and your spackles and
Yes.
whatever, all that there. Okay, so you don't anticipate actually needing even 3 parking spaces, or maybe just one for a truck, or I'm assuming you have a
Yes.
truck or something that you work from?
Yes, I have a van.
Okay, a van. And so you'll be using that's where you'll be parking your van and walking home?
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay. So I just wanted to get an understanding of how the space would be presented within the neighborhood, because I know what it used to be. So it's just basically going to be your home office.
That's correct.
Okay.
Eric?
Are you purely an electrical contractor or a more general contractor?
Electrician, electrical contractor.
Any other questions? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmembers Brown,
We had a motion already?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I had one more question for Lily, actually. Just the map was this a map of the people that signed in favor? Is that
In
what they-
favor, they had an address associated to it, and that's a map of the people where they live.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, yes.
Hersey,
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Wu?
Yes.
That motion passes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Next item is ordinance number 2019-08042, which is the ordinance approving the extension of final plat approval for the Union Gardens subdivision, Plan Case 2364 S18. Lily will be presenting this one as well. And a representative of Union Gardens is in the audience tonight as well.
This is a very short request. As you can see in the staff memo, Kevin Garcia has done a very loving job of writing up, but basically, the subdivision ordinance asks that the final plat, after approval, needs to be recorded after 180 days. Union Gardens Trinitas Development LLC has requested an extension for a year. If an ordinance is approved tonight, we can extend that final plat approval to be recorded up to a year.
Is there a motion? And then we'll have discussion.
I move approval to extend the time for the plat to be recorded.
I'll second it.
Moved by Eric, seconded by Jared. Any questions for Lily or the Union Gardens representative? Mary Alice?
So I'm just curious, are we approving it for 1 year since we approved? Let's see here. I'm just, unless the city council grants an extension. So right now it's at 180 days, but when does the clock start? When does for the 1 year clock
So
start?
it would be 180 days after the approval of city council is the impression that I've gotten. Yes.
Lori Pearson?
Lori.
If you want to look at, if you want to look at section 1 in the ordinance, it says, "Is hereby extended for an additional 1 year period commencing upon the expiration of the original 180-day approval." So that's about now.
So it's 1 year from today, if it's approved.
Or-
It's not
Or
1
the
year
exact
from...
date that it expires. I don't know exactly, but it's around now. So 1 year from about now.
1 year from February 4th?
No, from
No,
approximately now.
from now,
Oh.
August.
We'll just go with August 5th,
Yeah,
plus or
roughly.
minus.
So I guess my question is, why a year?
I would defer to the applicant to address that.
And can you please state your name?
I I'm Kimberly Hansen. It's good to see you guys again. So the year request actually just came because that would match with what we have from Champaign. I certainly hope we do not need a full year. That would be unusual. But the planner in Champaign told me about a month ago that he needed to grant an extension, and he sent me a letter for a year. So then I thought, okay, I'll request a year here as well.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So you're depending on the construction in Champaign, or the planner in Champaign to, regarding how you're going to have the final plat for Urbana? I'm just trying to...
So our development is in both Champaign and Urbana,
Yeah.
so it just requires the extension in both. We got approvals from both municipalities.
Aren't they building already in Champaign?
Not yet.
No.
Nope.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Any other questions? Bill?
Just a procedural question, I guess, since this is our council meeting, not the committee of the whole, and this hadn't come to the committee of the whole before, and it wasn't forwarded by a committee, do we need to suspend the rules in order to consider it at this meeting?
No, all of this is coming from the
Plan Commission.
Plan Commission or Zoning Board of Appeals, so we don't need.
I don't think this one was, and I
Oh,
don't
this
think
one-
the
this one
last,
didn't?
I don't think the
This
one.
plat didn't
with the,
require approval by
certified
Plan
housing.
Commission. It came directly to you
Oh,
because
it's
of the
also
timeliness.
it's an ordinance, so ordinances don't fall under that same rule. It's only resolutions that do.
Okay, so for number 5, the resolution will have to suspend the rules then.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Trustees Brown,
No.
Hersey,
No.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Wu.
Yes.
Requires 4 council members' approval, according to
Requires 4 council members for approval.
our general rules require 4, I believe.
So this motion fails to pass.
Is that, can you verify that, Counselor?
I believe it fails.
Okay.
So this will halt the entire project permanently?
No, just till we have a better understanding, at least for me, to have a better understanding of what the issue exactly is with your net. I was just thinking, I'm sorry, am I speaking out of order?
I can call on you to speak. Sharice.
Thank you. Okay, my initial problem is that I remember when all this was going down.
Yes.
And how everyone was in such a hurry to get it done, and if we don't, if we don't vote on it now, and blah, 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 blah. It was one of the first things I think I had to vote on when I first got here. And now you're not doing something that was so rushed. So I would really like to understand why.
Sure. I wish the answer was simple.
I
There's
wish it
probably
was, too.
been 100 tiny challenges on the way, along the way. But I think if you look at it from a bigger picture, it was more difficult than anticipated. In order to close with debt and equity partners, you need to be shovel ready, which includes approved engineering plans and approved building plans. With the 2 different ordinances and working with both cities to make sure we match requirements in both in different sections of the development has just taken a long time. We're
and-
very close, but we're just not there.
But see, I remember, you know, in particularly because this is my ward, I remember people saying how they weren't for it in my ward, including myself at the time, and feeling the pressure of it's basically a done deal And, you know, if it's not voted on right away, then I think, you know, people were talking about, we'll go elsewhere, blah, 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 blah. So it was a hurry up and wait kind of thing now, is what it is. And so I want more information. I want to know why you need a year. Why,
I
or
don't
why you may
anticipate-
think you may not need it, but why you even think you may need a year extension for something that seemed to be so hurried and rushed back in February.
I do not think we need a full year. The reason I'm requesting it is because that matches my approvals from Champaign, and I'm trying to keep parallel paths as much as I can.
I understand that.
With a little luck, we will start in September. We have a September 1 goal as a company. I do need to have building plan approval from Urbana and Champaign. I'm on my second round of reviews. I'm hopeful, but I don't have complete control on that being a set date. So if it were to take longer than anticipated and things just have, we would want to push till spring because it's hard to start construction in the winter. So the timing does push out a little bit.
Okay.
Question?
Question, yeah, just a clarification. Obviously, there's a lot of construction already on the Urbana side.
Yes.
And so this has been able to proceed to this point without recording the plat,
We do not own the land right now.
because you don't own the land, but the construction is going forward.
There's
Is-
no construction going on right now. There's no construction. We've pulled no permits.
This is north.
We will not
Oh,
start
I'm sorry, this is
construction
north of
until
where the
we
current
close.
construction is, yeah, okay. I'm
The
sorry.
landmark property.
I'm sorry. Okay, short circuit, short circuit. Okay. What, maybe you can clarify the consequences of not getting an extension. And maybe you can also, yeah, clarify how long an extension you think you actually need.
Let me do a little math in my head.
Okay.
And why do you not own the land? I thought the land was owned, that's why we did all the rezoning and all that kind of stuff. But you don't own it?
We do not own it.
And if I may, it's often typical for a developer to purchase land under contract, and a typical provision of a contract, and I'm guessing that might be the case here, is that they need the appropriate approvals from the jurisdictions. And in this case, those appropriate approvals, as my understanding, is the building permit, an issued building permit. So it's that piece that they don't have, and therefore they don't want to take possession of land until they know they can build on it.
Okay, so my understanding is that this particular land that we rezoned or whatever we did so that they could get what they wanted was originally business, industrial, correct? Under zoning.
At least a portion of it, yes. Another portion was a multifamily residential zoning, or duplex zoning.
Okay. Okay. Grocery store. Just thinking.
Mary Alice?
So, Sharice, basically, the neighborhood just above Carver neighborhood, that was multifamily.
Okay.
And then north of that was industrial.
Was industrial.
Yeah, so we rezoned that to all be residential.
Right.
I think we went to R4, if I remember correctly, R4 or R5, I can't
can't
remember which
remember
one.
what-
But I just wanted to let you know
Yeah, it
that
was R something.
it was already abutting the neighborhood was residential, it wasn't
Well, I know it's
zoned for-
behind Culver, I remember it's behind Carver Park, but, and part of it was county and part of it was city. Am I correct in my
Correct.
recall? Okay, and that it, and one was, I'm not sure which one was residential, and one was industrial. And they were rezoned, they both got rezoned so to accommodate that. My assumption then was at the time was that they owned the property.
No, a prospective owner can purchase, or excuse me, a prospective owner can apply to rezone property, and so it's structured so that they're requesting a rezoning in order to do something to that land that the current property owner doesn't have an interest in doing. So that is why the developer requests it, because the current owner just wants to sell it, and they don't want to go through that process. So in this case, what happened is the prospective developer and owner went through those processes in order to get the, what they're called our zoning entitlements, in order to be kind of allowed to do what you want to do. But then they had to go through the process of the building permits, and I can only imagine, I mean, I see it on this end, how long it takes to get through the building permit process on a really complicated process or project, but then you put in another jurisdiction and their rules in it. I mean, that just perhaps not doubles it, but maybe even triples the level of complexity, and perhaps the time even. So I think it's a combination of having it be a large project, but splitting the jurisdictions that really complicates the building permit process, and it takes a little bit longer for sure.
Okay, see, this is a conversation I would have liked to have had before saying, okay, you got to vote on it.
You can move to reconsider.
Did Champaign give you the extension?
Yes.
Okay, so Champaign gave you the extension.
Eric?
Is it an overstatement to say that if you can't extend the time for doing this maneuver, that the entire project's in jeopardy?
Yes.
It's not an overstatement.
No.
That's an accurate statement. Okay.
So my question then next is, would it be a problem if, could you wait till well, at least could I get more information? I can't speak for everyone on the.
We do have a deadline, however, which
What's
is...
the deadline?
I need to calculate it for sure, but it's pretty much today, unfortunately.
And we do have a challenge. The next 2 weeks, we're going to have 3 council members absent from the next 2 meetings
Because I'm going to be one of them.
due to vacations and scheduled travel.
I'm happy to answer any questions or explain.
What are
more
the
of what we're
consequences
working
if we don't, if it's not approved tonight? What are the consequences to them?
on.
Do you lose the authority of the property, or?
So without the approval, is the understanding I would go back
So
to
there's
Plan
no-
Commission and start the process over?
So this is just for the final plat, and I don't recall if you required any waivers. So if you did not, then it, basically, they'd need to resubmit the plat. Staff would have to re-review it, send it out to outer agency review for them to re-review the plat and say whether or not they had any issues with it. Then we compile all of those comments and go, then bring it here for reapproval of the same plat.
From a developer perspective, we probably would lose control of our land. All of our subcontractor negotiations would be done. I mean, it would be very serious.
In all likelihood, this will start within the next couple of months.
Yes, that is the goal. The only reason we're asking for longer is you do hit winter at some point.
Okay, so your goal is to begin construction in both Champaign and Urbana by the end of the month.
I would have started in March if I could have, yeah. We're ready. We've been ready. It just takes time to work through the processes.
Any other questions? Mary Alice?
Sherry, I'm wondering if you would be more comfortable if the extension was for a shorter amount of time, rather than a year, 3 months, 6 months, whatever. I'm just curious. Is it the length of time that you're...
It is the length of time because of the fact that I never got to actually get this under my brain in the first place. So, yeah, maybe if it was a shorter amount of time, I wouldn't have a problem with extending it.
Is that possible to do?
Sure, the ordinance can certainly be amended to list a different time frame.
Can we give them just another 180 days?
Sure.
even
Does
though
it-
we've already defeated the motion. I don't know procedurally how this would be done.
We can amend it.
No, she needs to move to reconsider.
You'd have to move, somebody on the winning side has to move to reconsider, which in this case is be Sharice or Bill. Anybody can second it, and then a majority vote would allow for reconsideration of the motion.
And then you can amend the original
Then you can amend the
motion.
original motion.
So is there a motion for reconsideration?
Okay, I'll move to reconsider.
Second.
So moved by Sharice to reconsider, seconded by Eric. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Okay, this motion is up for reconsideration. Is there another motion?
I move to amend ordinance 2019-08042, an ordinance approving the extension of final plat approval, Union Garden subdivision, plan case number 23464S18. I move to change the extension from a year to 180 days.
Is that roughly February?
An extension of 180 days. Well, but sweetie, if you said eventually winter's going to come, so winter is
We
coming.
got a month.
Just know that.
I'll second the motion.
So that was moved and as amended by Sharice, seconded by Eric. Any further discussion?
Diane?
Just to clarify, is that a complete motion of moving the ordinance with 180 days as the change,
The
or do we want to do a substitute? Bill was raising his hand here, too.
The extension. I'm just saying
You're
extending.
amending section 1, where it says hereby extended for an additional 1-year period. You're changing that to 180 days.
Because from what I understand, from what Kimberly has said, correct? That's your name. They expect to actually begin, or she hopes that they will begin that by the end of the month. If it moves, if it doesn't happen at the end of the month, then you may have to come back and ask for another extension. But I'm not stopping all extensions. What I want is that there be something in place, like she
The
hopes.
original, yeah, just the motion to reconsider puts the original motion back on the table, which was moved and seconded by Eric and Jared. And so you've moved an amendment, so what we
So-
need to do next is vote on the amendment and then vote on the ordinance.
And just to
Okay.
be clear, this does not mean that construction will start in 180 days. It means that this plat is going to be recorded and they will have their building
Right.
permit. Is that correct?
Right.
So this does not hold them to having bulldozers out there on that
No, they may
ground.
not have bulldozers, but if you want a final plat, you've had time, you've had plenty of time to get that going. What I'm asking is that it not be extended for a year for a final plat.
Okay.
You know, that it,
All right, that-
but you do get an extension.
Okay,
for
so we're
that.
voting on the amendment of 180 days.
Oh,
Is
we
that
have-
roll
yeah.
call, or is that,
This is
all those in
vote.
I
favor?
think Bill had a question.
Bill?
I'll just explain my vote. I voted against it originally because I thought the plat was deficient, didn't show some of the things that a final plat was supposed to show. As far as I know, it hasn't been corrected, so I'm just trying to be consistent and vote no again.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. That amendment passes. Then we will vote on the full ordinance as amended. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Brown,
No.
Hersey,
Yeah.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Roberts, or Wu.
Yes.
That has 4 votes. That motion passes. Thank you.
Kimberly, tell your colleagues that they just about gave you a heart attack, and now they better get it in gear and get this done.
Being fired tomorrow, so that was going to be really great. So, great, thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, next on the agenda is ordinance number 2019-08-040, An ordinance amending the Urbana zoning ordinance for an omnibus text amendment 2, Plan Case 2377 T19.
Before Lily, you get started, I just want to explain to council why we have two separate ordinances for kind of the same thing. We had started Amendment 2 and started processing that through Plan Commission. Plan Commission had to cancel 2 meetings due to lack of quorum, and therefore we had already queued up number 3, so you're seeing them together. I hope that does not cause too much confusion.
All right, first zoning ordinance omnibus of tonight, which is the second. Don't get confused like I might. So there's 9 articles that are amended, and Plan Commission discussed this several times, continued at various times due to lack of quorum, as Lori mentioned. During that Plan Commission meeting, there were 2 substantive issues that were discussed, really 2 that were fairly large in the omnibus. Most changes were really clarifications. There were some references that need to be clarified. There were a couple things. The first one was second principal structures in R3 and other zoning districts being allowed by right if they meet all other development regulations. And that would be just to match the density that is currently allowed in R3, but allow duplex density, but in 2 structures on a 1 lot. We've been getting a lot of cases. Zoning Board of Appeals has been hearing a lot of cases. So that was really interesting for Plan Commission to hear about, and we discussed at length that suggested change.
Just on that, you said 2 second principal structures in R3 and other zoning districts. It's second principal structures in R3, but for other zoning districts, there's no limit, right?
Yeah, there's no limit. Currently how the zoning ordinance is written, multifamily buildings are already kind of exempt from this. And for business and industrial, this would be a change in allowing multiple principal structures, but only if it would allow for within the development regulations.
And currently, we don't allow single-family homes in multifamily in R4, R5, R6 without a conditional use.
Single-family homes are allowed in higher level residential.
Not more than 1 on a lot. You can't have a R5 with 3 or 4 single-family homes on it without a conditional use or a subdivision.
We're going to defer to, as Lori comes up with the large zoning ordinance.
I'll get the exact section, but I think that would fall under the exception that she just said were multifamily zoning districts, but let me get that language.
Yeah, it's currently...
It's for multifamily structures, but not for single-family or duplex structures. So this would be a major change for that.
I think that there's permitted by right single-family homes, dwelling units allowed in all multifamily areas, so you can have multiple structures. And the principal use of those structures could be single-family homes.
Section 5.2 before prohibited that, and you've changed it to allow that.
So Lily, are you basically talking about something like a 2 on a lot type of deal, like you've got a single-family home and then you've got a garage with an apartment on top of it or something like that?
Yeah, as the memo points out, in the past 2 years, we've had a lot of people with the garage apartment situation, but there's also been a couple of people who have come to us talking to us about mother-in-law suites. And most of these, just to be clear, because it's not very clear when you're pulling out just a snippet of the zoning ordinance, what all of this kind of ties into. But when you do that, most of these are new projects, so you can't really take your garage and turn it into a garage apartment.
No garage conversions.
It'd be incredibly hard, maybe cost prohibitive. And so a lot of these cases have been coming to us to get a conditional use for that second principal structure, but it's going to be a rebuild of maybe a garage on the first floor, an apartment above, or maybe it's going to be a mother-in-law suite. But they've been kind of getting conditional use for that, and we wanted to provide a couple of protections for the city of Urbana for illegal subdivisions. So we thought it would be an appropriate time to kind of address that and kind of allow us, at least in R3, to look at the rest of the building permit without having to go to Zoning Board of Appeals when Zoning Board of Appeals has been approving these.
Okay. Lori, did you have something to add?
So the text that Alderman Brown was discussing, I think, is original text 5.3C3. In zoning districts which permit multiple family residential uses, no conditional use permit shall be required to allow more than one multiple family residential building on a single lot. I will say that the way that that has been used, if you look at some development patterns, is that it has allowed a structure, more than one structure that looks like a single family home, but because there are multiple ones on that lot, that I believe the interpretation was made in the past that you're looking at, those are individual units, they might not be connected, they're just separate, but they're multiple units, and therefore it functions as a multiple family.
Can you give an example of that?
So Highland Green is the first one that I can think of off the top of my head, where those are built as, from a construction standpoint, as single family, or as, I think there's some duplexes there, but that is one large lot, and those are whatever number, 42 units or whatever it is on there. So they're constructed from a single family standpoint, but from a zoning standpoint, those are multiple family because there's multiple families on one lot. So subdividing all of those to be single family would be really difficult to meet all of the zoning regs and have the public street might have killed the project, that kind of thing. And so having one lot simplifies things in a lot of ways.
And that wasn't done as a planned use development.
No.
And
Sounds like it might be non-conforming to me.
Just to clarify really fast, too, it's a really historical form of housing. Eric Jacobson mentioned that at a meeting when we had a second principal structure, but with also a major variance. So it came to council. It was in order to allow for a garage apartment in R3 that would allow the mother of the owner of the house to stay in that garage apartment as she ages, and they'd be close together. But the
Yeah.
major variance was for a tree, and that was mentioned that a lot of historical homes would have a coach house of some sort on the lot, and that was, and that's something that it wasn't until really later in the 20th century that cities and municipalities, including Urbana, started not prohibiting. So,
Yeah, I understand that argument, and I think that by itself is interesting, to allow a second structure. It's interesting you picked R3 because actually some of the older homes are in R2 that had carriage houses, but R3 is our biggest zoning district. I mean, I think there's over 3,000 lots in R3, so I'm glad you clarified it to make sure that you couldn't have two duplexes on one lot, because originally the way it was worded sounded like you could have two duplexes. I think actually that might have gone a little beyond. It's actually more restrictive than what it was originally, because now even with a conditional use, you couldn't have, because the way it says no more than two principal structures and no more than two dwelling units are allowed per lot. It doesn't say with a conditional use you might be able to do it. So you might want to put that back in there that if you have a large R3 lot, and there are a few, you might, with a conditional use, want to put 2 or 3 duplexes on it.
Although that would then kick it into a multi-family sort of density, and therefore the zoning perhaps should be changed to R4, or do a
Okay,
planned
that's
unit
good
development.
argument. So that's more restrictive than it was before. I think my main concern is allowing single family in R4, R5, R6, every place where single family is normally allowed if you do the subdivision. It seems like it's just easy. I mean, it's interesting because you could actually do tiny home developments. You
That's
could
what I was
do
gonna say.
a dozen tiny homes or something. But if you did that today, you'd either need to get a conditional use, a planned unit development, or let the zoning administrator consider it a mobile home park, and treat it like a mobile home park, which is real restrictive, and we have 10 pages of regulations on that. So I'm just wondering if we have 10 pages of regulations on mobile home parks, and this is pretty similar to that, maybe we need some control over a development that has 20 or 30 little tiny homes on it. Like mobile home parks say you can't have overhead electricity wires connecting the homes, things like that.
Yeah, those are very different.
Yeah.
Not to confuse those two, mobile home parks and tiny homes. They're not the same one would fill into. So there's two different kinds of triggers that would come along with that. So.
Yeah, so I'm just worried that allowing it by right, any number of single-family homes by right in a R4, R5 district is, for one, a pretty major change for what normally is a text amendments are normally grammatical errors and putting in things in tables of contents and things like every other change, and these two are, but this is a major one, and I think it probably should have been a separate planning case, and I know there was a lot of discussion on it, and I appreciate Plan Commission's discussion of the commercial uses and how this probably isn't going to be a problem in the commercial uses, but this one area does concern me, so I'd suggest taking out any changes to Section 5.
I really quickly would like to just address that a little bit, if I can. Currently, we're not suggesting any changes in density that is already currently allowed. So you could have an R4 property, and if it had the space to have those principal structures, you would just need a conditional use permit. But you wouldn't need any variances to have multiple. And actually, I don't even think you would, because, I'm sorry, you wouldn't need that because it's exempt to have those multiple principal structures.
A strict reading of the ordinance is what Alderman Brown is doing, and so what I think the language doesn't capture very well is some of the traditional housing types, like cottage developments, for instance, that we might want to investigate going toward in order to increase density in a more neighborhood context-sensitive way. But and I don't know if Buena Vista is on individual lots, but it's that kind of development that we want to think about. That's the future, probably. So I think, making this change, this clarification, helps to recognize that that is an okay type of development. But if that's not something you're comfortable with, then certainly we can, address that more thoroughly, because there's a lot of things that we think the future holds, and it would benefit the city of Urbana to look into doing. But if you're not ready for that yet, then that's fine. But I'm glad you brought up tiny homes, because that is certainly something that I know that there's a lot of desire to allow, and it's sort of been what I've been hearing from people is that we should look at how to make that happen, not how to make that harder to happen.
Well,
So-
I think it could happen today with a conditional use, isn't that right?
If we wanted to,
And that would give Plan Commission
ZBA.
some ability, wouldn't give council any ability to do anything, because conditional uses don't come to council, isn't that right?
They go just as zoning board of appeals.
The
that's
zoning
correct.
board, yeah, so it
So-
gives the zoning board some opportunity to say you have to have a drive here, not there, some access to building, you have to have 20 feet between buildings or whatever. Right, without that, there's really not much.
Well, there's building code for things like that,
Yeah.
for sure.
And zoning ordinance.
Right, so
Yeah.
frankly, I think that there's enough in this book to give them a lot of requirements. There's also the subdivision ordinance, which talks about things like how close, if you're building a new road, how close that road can be to the next road, that kind of thing. So there's certainly a lot of regulations, and perhaps that's why we don't have any today, is because there's so many layers of regulations.
But it is something that ZBA has been considering for the past 2 years, many of those cases. And if you look at how many cases they get, and then how many of them are people trying to establish these second principal structures.
Yeah, I don't have a
it's pretty
problem with that,
substantial.
although even that, I think it would have been worth having a separate plan case so that neighbors could have a better idea of what was going on.
Any questions? Any other questions? Sharice?
See, because now I'm like really confused. My question is, and was going to be, with the verbalization of, or however you want to put it, the rewriting of the R3 thing about the second principal structures, would that more readily allow a little subdivision of tiny homes? Would that, or is this just for people who own property and they want to put the garage apartment, or is it something that could be used to develop that type of artist community?
Well, to have a community, so if the R3 zoning district would only allow you, if this were to be approved, would only allow you to have 2 units on that one piece of property.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose if you amassed a number of those properties, you could have 2 units per.
Mhm.
But to encourage something like a tiny home development, you would probably have more of an R4 or R5 zoning district, which is the multifamily districts that typically you would have, an apartment building or 2 on, but
Yeah, but a tiny home, isn't it designed for just 1 or 2 people to be to live in that area?
typically per unit, yes.
Yeah,
So
per
we deal
unit.
with units
Mhm.
in zoning. We don't deal with how many people are in that building. So zoning is looking at
Bring down the game, baby.
how many people per lot,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily how many people per unit, at least in this regard. So I think what you're asking for, if you were going to do a tiny home development, would this thing on the R3 affect you? Probably not, unless you had a bunch of R3 individual lots, because you couldn't cram 3 tiny homes on one R3 lot. Yeah,
okay.
because
But you could
R3 is
put 2.
designed, if this is approved.
You could have two tiny homes on a lot, and you're saying that, if there were 3 or 4 consecutive lots, you could have 8 tiny homes in an
Right.
area.
So the reason we brought this forward is because we're really looking at, so today, in R3, you can build a duplex as long as those units are touching one another.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're asking is, isn't it okay if those 2 units are not touching each other?
Okay.
Because it's the same
Mhm.
number of people presumably are going to live in that. It's just a
Mhm.
matter of, is there space between those units? And from a zoning perspective, we don't see that it has an impact, a negative impact on the neighborhood, and that's what zoning does, is it looks at impact at your neighbors, of your
Mhm.
neighbors. And so we don't see that there's a negative impact if you separate those units.
So they don't have to be attached, in other words.
Correct.
So, as it is now, it has to be attached.
Correct.
So that's the issue regarding the garage apartment and the house, is that they're usually not attached. And so now we're going to allow them to be unattached.
Correct.
Which we currently, as Lori pointed out, allow duplex to come in with a building permit. It meets all other development regulations, and it would be eventually approved. But
Okay.
we have this extra step
Mhm.
that CBA has been approving on a regular basis for the same kind of density, but to approve that density. So,
Okay, I'm just trying to understand the regulation. Okay.
Any other questions? Is that Mary Alice?
So I know there's a lot in this, and we've kind of jumped the gun here on the hot topic. So I do have questions on something else, but I don't know if you want to proceed.
Yeah.
I think you have a you still
You have a
presentation.
presentation. I mean, I
correct?
have the same concerns that Bill has, and I appreciate that he brought those very specific instances up. And I definitely want to address those as well, but I'm wondering perhaps we should finish this and then open up discussion.
sure. Well, actually, I have a presentation that I can provide, but I've set it up so that we could talk about some of the major
Okay.
issues, because everything is in the memo and what has been discussed. So if there's something that you've seen and you have a question about, I have to talk about non-commercial institutional electronic signs in B4, because that was also a concern that came up that staff has looked into. But if there is a question besides that, I have the regulations here for those 2, but I can pull up the regulations for for other parts that you might have questions about.
So the one about the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices,
Yes.
Article, was that 9?
Yeah, it's 9.
9 signs?
And private directional traffic signs, yeah.
Right, so amend the definition of private directional and instructional signs. So it says that MUTC does not regulate these types of signs. So what do they do?
Yeah, MPDCD does not regulate those types of signs. It actually says it on their FAQ page that they don't regulate those types of signs. What they do is, so the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices will regulate all sorts of, like, the red lights, the stop signs. They need to be red, they need to be octagonal, they have to be a certain setback, they have to be
But they don't regulate those types of signs, is what you're
at
saying.
this speed, they have to be this big. Yeah, they don't regulate private directional signs, traffic signs. So that would be a really good example of that. And when businesses fill out permits for that, they get extra points. They, like a thank you, come in entry on like a drive-through business, for instance, and then an exit sign to remind people, hey, this is the exit of the parking lot or the drive-through. Those are all ones that are well within the setbacks allowed. And so MUTCD, when we made that reference, they might have been regulating it then, but it was something that was probably for just an oversight that it's still in our zoning ordinance. MUTCD does not regulate that type of sign.
Okay, but MUTC is something that regulates items. It doesn't just give suggestions on best use.
No, yeah, so
Okay,
they
I
don't-
just wanted to make
yeah.
that clarification in terms of, do they have recommendations even if they don't regulate those items? And the
Yes.
answer to me is no, they do not make those recommendations. They only regulate certain kinds of signs.
Yes, not
Okay.
all types of signs.
Thank
you. You can have a pirate flag, but they're not going to talk to you about that. They're going to talk to you about your stop sign.
Oh, okay, all right, no pirate flags. My second question had to do, and there was a conversation at the Planning Commission about this, with the, there was a phrase that was being changed in terms of property owner.
Yes, there
And-
was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the other phrase? I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
should have
so
written
there
it
are
down.
4 different definitions of a property owner in the historic preservation article. And this was a recommendation that came from legal division that we should maybe try to cut down on our different definitions of something that we're using and referring to with the intent of being the same thing. And so we tried to make that much more uniform by using one definition of property owner. And if you can kind of go back and you flip back to Article 2, Article 2 has a definition of owner that's included, and it refers to our city code's definition of property owner, which is a little bit more helpful to not have as many definitions floating around, especially since the two kind of work together. But what we wanted to do is make sure that we made it uniform for people when they're reading the historic preservation article in the zoning ordinance. They knew that we're talking about, their real property or the house that's on the property, as opposed to the 4 different ways that we were kind of doing it. The parcel owner of record and
Their
owner
parcel
of record.
owner, thank you, that's the one I was
Yeah.
looking for. And the reason I wanted clarification, I was hoping that legal could, Jim, you could help me with this. So I don't know if this is the case in Illinois. I know it's the case in other states in which a parcel can be owned by somebody and the actual building is owned by somebody else.
You could do that.
So is that allowed in the state of Illinois?
In Illinois, yes.
Okay, so does this definitional change affect that at all? Because a parcel to me is land, and an owner, a property owner, is somebody who owns a building, but that's just my,
Right, and that should be defined in case you were ever confused as to what they're referring to, right? So to the best of my knowledge, we're trying to cover and make that more uniform to talk about the owner, the property owner.
so the property owner is the building owner, not the person who owns the actual land that the building is sitting on.
The landowner.
So it's the land owner, so it's the parcel owner.
Lori? And Lori, please check that, because this
understand
has
this
been continued a couple of times, so it's been a little while since I reviewed Article 12.
Say that again, please.
So you can have somebody who owns the physical land, the soil, right? And you can have somebody who owns the structure that's on the land. It does not have to be the same individual.
Correct.
Okay, so since we're kind of merging a whole bunch of ownership titles here, the definitions that we're using for owners, does that mean that we're no longer differentiating between the person who owns the soil and the person who owns the structure, or does it matter? That's my question here.
Well, the definition in the zoning ordinance of owner is a person having a legal or equitable interest in personal property or real property. The terms person, personal property, and real property have meanings set forth in the Urbana Code, which I will need to look up what, I read it for Plan Commission. I do not remember what that said, but perhaps that gives a little more information under real property, what it refers to. Do you happen to know off the top of your head?
Couldn't hear the last thing you said.
I'm just wondering what the city code says in terms of a definition for real property, because that is defined in the city code.
I'd have to look it up, and I can look it up, but I will say, I'll give you an example. The medical building, and I don't know if it's this way now, the ownerships may have merged, but when the medical office building was built in front of what is now OSF, one entity owned the land, another entity owned the medical office building. Now, I don't know what's happened since the closure of TIF 3. That's how I got involved with it. And owner, whether it's in the zoning ordinance or in our code, can be defined as anything the person adopting the ordinance or the code wishes it to be. Normally, when you define owner, there can be a problem, which is exactly what you're suggesting. Owner of what? And I'd have to dig into the city ordinance, and I can do that while the discussion's going on. But off the top of my head, I don't know how our city code, separate from the zoning ordinance, I don't even know if it defines owner or where it defines owner. For instance, in the liquor code, owner's defined as the owner of the establishment or the premises. So owner may be used in different ordinances in different ways, depending on the nature or the purpose of the ordinance. I don't think we have to my recollection, I haven't come across it, but I haven't really searched for it. I don't think we have an omnibus definition of owner, or unless defined elsewhere in the Urbana City Code, owner means X.
And there's like I see two definitions, owners of record and parcel owner. And Mary Alice, you were talking about real property or somebody, real property? I don't see anything like that, but what I do see, a parcel owner is an owner of record of a parcel. And then you have the owner of record, the person or persons or corporation or other entity in whose name or names the property is held according to the last recorded deed in the records of the Champaign County Recorder. So what are we amending? I guess that's what I want to know.
Yeah, okay, so what we're trying to do in Article 12 in general is to actually provide context to that and a uniform language for that. As far as the definitions, we are referring to a specific part of the Urbana City Code, which is Section 1-3. And I will say that Assistant City Attorney Kurt Borman has reviewed all of Article 12 to make sure that it makes sense and it actually addresses what we're talking about for owner and property. So I hope that helps.
Eric.
So according to Illinois.gov, the definition of real property, it includes the land and any permanent improvements to the land, like buildings, fences, landscaping, driveways, sewers, or drains. And I guess that the owner of that, my guess is that the owner of that, and maybe this was alluded to, would be defined by whoever
Pays the taxes.
well, whoever the deed says owns the land, whatever it says in the Recorder of Deeds office.
Right. And that building owner is a leasehold of the property.
Unfortunately, the definition in 1, or Urbana City Code 1-3 doesn't really answer your question. It says the word owner applied to a building or land shall include any part owner, joint owner, tenant in common, tenant in partnership, joint tenant of the whole or part of such building or land. It doesn't say owner means the owner of the land or the owner of the building or both, because it depends on what context the word owner appears. So the owner, depending if it's a contract or something elsewhere in the code, if the context suggests owner of the land, real property. In law, typically we use the term real property and personal property. Real property meaning real estate, personal property meaning tangible objects, and
Contents.
some people use it as what we call chosen actions, meaning a right to sue. But lawyers differ on that one. But again, it's the context in which, based on this definition, in which the word appears. So this definition doesn't alone answer the question.
It sounds like you were going to add a definition of owner to Article 2. Has that been proposed?
Yes, that's in Article 2, in your packet.
And can you read that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Had the page. Oh, here we go. Owner, a person having a legal or equitable interest in personal property or real property. The terms person, personal property, and real property have the meanings set forth in Urbana City Code Section 1-3 as amended. And I can pull that up on the screen too if you'd like.
And Section 1-3 says what?
Oh,
Can I interject for 1 second to further, I hate to say it, muddy the water? Because buildings normally, when they are built on property, are considered fixtures, i.e. they cannot be easily removed, in which case buildings become real estate as opposed to personal property. A trailer, a mobile home that's easily moved, would typically be tangible personal property. This building that you're sitting in is real estate because it's firmly affixed to the premises. So again, we're back to whatever definition or use of the word owner you want to put in context.
It sounds like we need some more clarification on this. So let's just, when this comes to consideration, pull this section out so we can make sure we're all on the same page, rather than go round and round on this tonight.
Actually, with that, I think perhaps the best thing is to put this back on to committee, so we can have further conversations about this at the next meeting. So I'm going to make a motion that this ordinance number 2019-08040, ordinance amending the Urbana zoning ordinance, omnibus text amendment 2, plain case number 2377T19, be sent back to committee.
Second.
Any further discussion?
May I ask for clarification if there's any particular other items that have not been discussed already? If you could articulate ones that you want us to focus on so that we come prepared to the committee meeting?
I have the same concerns that Bill has in terms of, I believe it was Article 5. There was, as you said, a very robust conversation at the Planning Commission. I must say I really appreciate everybody's perspectives on there and enjoy watching their meetings. I find it interesting that we are attempting to fix an issue by opening up a much larger door than the issue that we're trying to fix. So the issue that we're trying to fix here are these garage conversions in R3. But in addition to that, we're doing a whole bunch of other things. So I would prefer to see text in here that only addresses R3 and does not address any of the other zoning. That's my personal preference. I don't know what the rest of council would like to see.
Bill?
I think that'd be appropriate for the text amendment, because I think it'd be all right to discuss that aspect, and that was discussed in the Plan Commission. The Plan Commission didn't discuss the potential for having tiny home developments. Didn't even come up, so I'd feel uncomfortable passing something that would allow that sort of development when they didn't even consider it, and it wasn't in the memo, it wasn't advertised. So yeah, I think addressing the second principal structure in R3 would be appropriate for that section.
Any other things to add for staff to look at specifically? Sharice?
Well, I'm not going to say for staff to look at, for me to look at, because I'm going to need some tutoring, Lori. If you could kind of give me take a half hour sometime, not this week, but next week or something. I don't know when. Anyway, half hour, 45 minutes to just give me a tutoring session so that I can understand what I'm voting for or against regarding the zoning ordinances. I have the book, but so if you could help me do that, I would appreciate it.
Okay. So at this point, we have to clarify the definition of owner, and we're also looking at second principal structure in R3. And if people come up with other items that you want staff to address in this particular one, just send Lori an email, and then we'll make sure everyone knows. Jared?
Just a quick comment to Lily and Lori in support of what Bill and Mary Alice are saying. I think I also saw the same thing in some of these sections, and I think a lot of discussion I've had with John and you guys over the years of where problems arose in some of the neighborhoods in my ward were a lack of clarification and a lack of purpose, we'll say, in the way zoning was written, because it was kind of, well, these people thought this was a good idea at the time, but then the ambiguity of the language allowed for uses that turned in to be inappropriate for the area later on down the line. And I just think what we're all looking for here is purposefulness in our language rather than ambiguity that allows for, and I'm sure you guys know this, but I think that's what we're after. If that helps guide your principle of looking at that going forward.
We share that goal. Okay, so this, let's see, where are we? We have a motion to send this to committee, and that was made by Mary Alice. Who seconded that?
Me.
Sharice. Okay. Does that require a roll call, or all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. All right, that heads back to committee. Next up is ordinance number 2019-08-041.
All right, so this is the last omnibus for tonight. And it's the third. We have 7 articles of amendment. In general, this is a much shorter omnibus text amendment being proposed tonight than the previous one that was heard. I'm going to go through this again fairly quickly and love to take questions. Plan Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval from City Council, and there was no public input for this plan case, 2384-T-19. And I have staff findings. So, the proposed amendment will assist with daily administration and enforcement of the zoning ordinance by improving clarity and updating language to meet current professional practices. The proposed amendment is consistent with the goals and objectives of the 2005 Urbana Comprehensive Plan regarding updating various sections of the zoning ordinance. 3, the proposed amendment will update the zoning ordinance to ensure that the regulatory environment more closely matches the goals and policies of the city. 4, the proposed amendment conforms to the notification and other requirements for the zoning ordinances as required by the State Zoning Act. And the options for City Council, the following are your options. 1, approve the ordinance as presented. 2, approve the ordinance as modified by specific suggested changes. Or 3, deny the ordinance. The recommendation at its July 18, 2019 meeting, the Plan Commission voted 7 ayes and 0 nays to forward to City Council with a recommendation to approve the proposed text amendment to revise multiple parts of the zoning ordinance. Staff concurs with this recommendation.
I should just point out that Alderman Roberts did email me about an item specifically related to the powers and duties of Plan Commission. I believe he was suggesting that some more detailed things be added to that section, whereas the text amendment suggests that we take out all those details and refer back to the city code. So I think perhaps this is a longer conversation that isn't necessarily would work well with what's on the table tonight, but perhaps is a different conversation about the city code. So I could read his comments if you would like, if that's helpful.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so he suggests adding an item or two to the revision, and then he refers specifically to Article 8, Article 11, administration. Add reference to the Urbana City Code for the powers and duties of Plan Commission. His comment states, regarding the item below, is it possible to add also reference to the Urbana City Council's goals? So the powers and duties right now, what they say are, they kind of refer back a little bit to the city code, and then they talk about a few other things, including hearing Champaign County Zoning Board of Appeals cases. One of the reasons we wanted to refer back to city code is to allow Champaign County Zoning Board of Appeals cases to come directly to this body, as was discussed, I think, in the April meeting, particularly for perfunctory items that really don't make a lot of sense to convene an entire body just to discuss something that's slam dunk, as they say in the business. So it was discussed that perhaps those could come directly here. To continue his comments, there are issues which come to the Plan Commission which need to have more consideration for the improvements of the aesthetics of the surrounding neighborhood and improving designs presented beyond how the project meets the parking requirements or the floor area ratios, etc., which are mathematical decisions but not qualitative decisions. The ZBA and Plan Commission ought to safeguard the aesthetic appearance of a design as well as the structural aspect of a design. I appreciate a step in this direction by adding reference to the Urbana Overlay District to the ordinance. Just a note on that, what we did was we added it to the table of contents. That was a previous text amendment about 3 years ago. To continue his comments, note the City Council of Champaign turned down a recent design proposed by Green Street Realty based on a lack of design quality, and they had adopted a design standard upon which to base the refusal, and they stood by it, citing the News Gazette story. Just a comment on that, all of the zoning cases that come before you need to be approved on a number of different criteria, and some of those are outlined in the zoning ordinance, others are based on case law. For instance, rezonings, we refer to the LaSalle criteria. So there's not a lot of wiggle room to add in extra stuff like you should also take into account X, Y, and Z. So it is for those reasons that I didn't think that we should jam something into the powers and duties for Plan Commission as this text amendment, because it is, I would need more clarification on his intent, to be honest. And then he mentions a couple of other things which I did not find a way to insert into the powers and duties of Plan Commission. But I wanted to bring this to your attention that he did contact me about this. But I'm not sure that he and I were on the same page in terms of what the amendment was suggesting to do. So in the absence of being able to talk to him, I wanted to at least bring this up, but mention that I couldn't find a way to accommodate this in an easy fashion, the day of the meeting.
Questions? Mary Alice?
So is the intent in Article 11, Section A, what is this? 11-2C, powers and duties of the Plan Commission, refer to Chapter 18 of the Urbana City Code. Is the purpose of striking everything there so that you don't have redundancy or inconsistencies between the city code and the zoning? Is that correct?
It is, in addition to simplifying things. So at one point, it was added that the Plan Commission needs to consider all Champaign County ZBA cases, which means if the county's processing something in a hurry and we don't happen to have a Plan Commission meeting, then we have to convene a special one just to hear something. Whereas if it's not in here, then we have the flexibility if we work out if something needs to be added to city code. But we at least have some flexibility to skip that step. But in instances where we have the time and you want it to go to Plan Commission, sure, the city code grants you powers germane to the, or grants the Plan Commission to other powers germane to the powers granted by this article as may be conferred by the city council. So you can ask them to do whatever, but that doesn't, you know, you don't need to necessarily write it in here because that limits your flexibility.
Okay, so now I'm actually confused.
I'm sorry.
So how would city council direct the plan commission to look at items from the county if we don't know if they're, I mean, we don't manage their agenda or anything. So I'm trying to figure out how city council would give that direction to plan commission.
Well, a couple ways. It could come here and you could say, I need more information. Probably more likely it would be staff would say, wow, this is one that looks a little hairy. Let me talk to the mayor. Okay, the mayor might agree, yeah, this is one that looks a little hairy. Perhaps Plan Commission should look at it first. But as I think we reported in an, perhaps we didn't report it here, but I think it's something like 99% of the Champaign County ZBA cases that come before this body are not protested. Yet we are convening a Plan Commission meeting to discuss items that 99% of the time do not get protested. So perhaps they should only be used in those cases where there's a potential there, that there's an issue that's been identified, that it could potentially have a negative impact on the city of Urbana. And so what this change does, and I don't know if it gets there 100%, but it gets us closer anyway to not requiring us, even if there's no time to do it, even if we don't have a quorum, not requiring us to take all of these items to Plan Commission.
So I guess perhaps one way to address Alderman Roberts' concerns about striking this information from the Plan Commission is to actually review the Urbana City Code, which defines the powers and duties of the Plan Commission. And if there are items there that should be clarified, then to add those there. It makes sense to me to have, we don't want to be duplicating things and then messing up and not updating things between two sources. So it makes sense to me to have something refer to the Urbana City Code, but at the same time, we need to look at the City Code to make sure that that reflects what we believe the Plan Commission, their operation should be.
And I will just point out that I'm not sure Alderman Roberts was concerned with, he didn't say anything about having a concern about removing the text. He was just suggesting we add more stuff to it.
So it would be adding more stuff.
And I'd be happy.
So
the city,
that would be something with the Urbana City Code that we should look at, I guess.
which, yeah, is not under discussion tonight. But
Correct.
I could read for you or summarize, if you'd prefer, the city code section on the powers of the.
Actually, it'd be great if you could just email it to
I
council.
will do that.
think
So,
that-
I mean, a
yeah.
lot of it is very much the same, but it's a little bit different, which just seems strange.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Jared?
Oh, I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention, when you made that motion, Mary Alice, we moved it to committee, but then it occurred to me that you were mentioning earlier we're going to have 3 council members gone for the next 2 meetings, and it might not behoove of us to discuss this at a meeting with only 4 council members or committee members. And perhaps, I don't know if we could just do it by voice approval, but maybe we need to move it to the next committee meeting after that, which would be on the 26th and not next week, because we're not going to have folks here still.
That's going to, we'll have to look at the agenda for that one. That's going to be a big one, so.
Yeah. I know there's probably a big, or maybe it needs to go 3 from now, unless it's that pressing that it needs to be done. In either case, we're going to be short next week, so any folks who want to have comments, I mean, we either got to plan carefully for you guys to get involved, or we've got to push it further down the line.
Is this time sensitive?
This former ordinance or this ordinance?
Former.
Thank you. The former one, the only thing that's that was requested of us, there is a church in the B4 district that has expressed an interest in putting up an electronic message board in their sign. That is the only one that I know about that is pressing on that one. Until we get another, actually there is someone that would need to submit a conditional use permit to put a a garage apartment or something like that on their R3 lot, but, so if we got to run it through the process, we run it through the
I don't
process.
know about that one.
So,
Perhaps the first committee meeting of September would be appropriate, rather than next week.
okay, procedure for that, do we
Can we just,
send it to committee? We'll just
Yeah.
designate that as the committee to send it to.
okay, that's all I was getting at.
Okay.
I know we're going to
All
be
right.
short next time.
That's a good thought. Thank you, Jared. All right, we are,
Oh, I also had a motion.
that's great, Jared.
I was going to move approval of ordinance number 2019-08-041, an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning ordinance, omnibus text amendment number 3, plan case number 2384-T-19, with the condition that we remove the section that Dennis brought up for further discussion, unless we feel like we don't want to wait for Dennis's comments on that.
I believe the decision was that the changes would be made to the city code rather than doing the changes that he recommended.
Is
to
that,
the
so
text.
is that separate from what the ordinance says, then?
Yes.
Or at least talk about it more rather than writing language on the fly.
Right.
His is
right.
very specific, whereas typically this language is more broad to give city council the ability to direct, the
No,
powers
I understand
germane.
his intents, but I don't think we can, I think what you were saying is that we cannot pass this ordinance without further clarification of that section, correct?
Well,
That's what I was understanding.
my understanding was we could keep the flexibility contained in this language, but clarify our Urbana City Code to whatever you wish it to say with regard to the Plan Commission duties.
Okay, I understand. Well, I'll withdraw that amended portion of my motion and just make a motion to pass it as stated.
Okay, so is there a second? And I know, Eric, you had your hand up, but can we get a
It's
second?
Motion to pass it as stated, Eric.
I'll second that.
Okay, moved by Jared, seconded by Mary Alice. Eric?
I just looked up that section of the city ordinance online, and maybe I'm reading it too quickly, but as far as I can tell, practically everything that the Plan Commission does is as specified by us. The ordinance doesn't give the Plan Commission the power to review any of this stuff that it does. So if we strip all of that out, maybe I'm reading it too quickly.
Could you help me understand?
So, yeah, I'm looking at Chapter 18 and then Article 2, Plan Commission. And so we've got the composition, terms of members, organization, officers, composition, powers. And this is to prepare and recommend a comprehensive plan, et cetera, to prepare and recommend to the council from time to time plans for specific improvements in pursuance of the official plan, to give aid to officials of the city charged with the direction of projects for improvements embraced within the official plan, and then finally, to exercise such powers, such other powers germane to the powers granted by this article as may be conferred by the city council. And then all the things that are in there now that you're proposing to strike out are those powers that are recommended by the city council. So I don't think that they're left with the power to do what they spend most of their time doing. If we take your text as it's presented to us. So what I'd like to do is propose an amendment to that actually recovers the amendment that Jared originally said, and just to strike out of what we're considering tonight, that that C, where and so that-
Referring to Chapter 18. You're talking about
Chapter 18.
undoing the strikeout.
Yes, undoing the strikeout of all of those things, and let's reconsider that, because if I'm reading this correctly,
How about, I'll talk to our legal staff separately to see if, because it was my understanding in discussing with a member of the staff, not Jim, but that number 4 was pretty broad and could cover a lot of these things. But we can have that discussion offline and
Let's
come
have,
back to you next.
let's have the discussion because, and maybe I've just, I hadn't read that section of the ordinance before, but I'm trying to read it really quickly.
The alternative.
It seems to me that we're really gutting what the Plan Commission is empowered to do.
Well, I think to Alderperson Wu's comment, perhaps then what needs to happen is that the city code needs to encompass things rather than having powers and duties split among 2 different documents that sometimes don't say exactly the same thing. So
I think that's perfectly fine, but, I'm concerned that if we pass the ordinance as it is, that a whole bunch of stuff will have fallen through the cracks.
Then I suggest you move to unstrike C, powers and duties for the time being until we can clarify city code.
I think that was his motion.
Yeah.
if I may, so if you
Or his amendment.
do that, then if we decide that either that number 4 in this provision is broad enough to cover everything, or I guess my point is, then we will have to make this another case and re-advertise this and go through the process again if we were okay with either as it is or with adding things to the city code. So my preference would be, just from a streamlining standpoint, is to, and there's nothing in here, Lily, that is time sensitive. Just hold on to this one too until we figure it out and come back to you with clarity, because that might be, well, let's just propose changes to the city code.
Okay, I'm good with that.
I'm good with that.
In such case, I will suspend my motion and amend. Can I make an alternate motion then?
Yes, please.
All right. I will move that we keep this ordinance number 2019-041 also sent to the appropriate next committee of the whole meeting, likely beginning of September.
I will second that.
So that's motion by Jared, seconded by Mary Alice, to send this to the next appropriate committee meeting, which will be in September, and we'll set a date quickly. Okay.
Don't we have to vote on it?
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you. Last item on the agenda under new business is resolution number 2019-08-031R, resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement with the Board of Trustees of the University of Illinois concerning certified housing inspections. And can you, do we need to suspend rules?
We need to suspend the resolution on resolutions for this one.
I'll move to suspend the resolution on resolutions to allow consideration of this resolution.
Is there
I'll
a second?
the suspension.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Great. Okay, we have, who's presenting?
I'd like to thank the council for suspending the rules for this. The only reason I just wanted to mention the only reason we were presenting it tonight was for time purposes. We just got through this process with the University of Illinois, and I'm going to introduce Nick Hansen, our recently promoted to Housing Inspector 2, Code Compliance Supervisor. He's going to explain it, but Nick will start inspections September 4th, and in order for us to get this to the University of Illinois, get it signed, and so forth, we needed to present tonight for council approval consideration.
All right, so before you have a 3-year intergovernmental agreement with the University of Illinois Board of Trustees regarding the private certified housing. This includes the option to renew 2 times for 2 additional years each time. This proposed agreement also includes a 2% annual increase. The agreement was reviewed by the city attorney. Staff did have concern with item number 10, as you will see, per the U of I legal, that we were told to strike it out and initial it, and they were good with that. So staff recommends approval of this intergovernmental agreement.
Any technical questions for Nick?
No, but I do have a motion.
Mary Alice?
I had a technical question. So we're doing all this work for the certified housing to make sure that they're all up to code and, students are safe and so forth. Approximately how much time do we spend doing this? Rough numbers.
Rough numbers, probably
100 hours, 10 hours?
I would estimate somewhere around 50 hours.
Okay.
Depending. It depends on the number of years, depends on the number of violations, how many times we have to work
Sure.
with them. So
Just
I would say between 50 and 100 off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. That was my one technical
Is there a
question.
motion?
I'd move resolution number 2019-08-031R, resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement with the Board of Trustees of the University of Illinois concerning certified housing inspections for a term of 2019 to 2022 be approved.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Eric. Further discussion?
I would like,
Do you have a question? Sure.
I'm not sure if I do. I was thinking, because it just says universities certified housing program, will you inspect their dorms or their apartments or?
Correct, the private certified housing, so that includes mostly fraternities and sororities.
Oh, okay, and then you tell them what they have to bring up to code, or?
Correct. So typically, just like we do any other residential inspection, we'll give them a notice of violations, and then we'll go back and do a reinspection.
And if they don't come up to code, you close down the fraternity house and no more keggers?
No, typically, the certified housing actually requires them to be inspected, and so they hold a very tight leash on the fraternities and sororities to make sure that they come into compliance. If they do not come into compliance with our notices, then they can actually be removed from the private certified housing list.
Okay. But you don't close them down, you just remove them from the list?
So that's basically, that's their decision on that. I mean, typically, we've not had an issue with anybody not getting things taken care of.
Okay.
We work very closely with the university, with the certified housing folks.
Okay.
Just to explain maybe a little, the University of Illinois has a certified housing section, and our staff works directly with them, and they manage the certified housing, all the houses on both sides of Wright Street. If we have an issue, and we've had this before, where we notify both the house and the certified housing office, and then the certified housing office works with us to make sure that the code is complied with, and if it isn't, then the certified housing office will close them down. It's not up to us to close them down, that's their decision, but we just work to make sure, and then we notify them if there are any
So if
issues.
Busey Evans doesn't meet the housing code or something, then you say to U of I,
So, correct. The private certified housing basically gives you 3 chances. So you have an inspection, and they will allow 2 re-inspections before there's repercussions through the university.
Okay.
So if they exceed more than 2 re-inspections, then, then the university private certified housing handles the issue.
Okay, so does the city of Urbana assist in any way as far as making these houses come up to code, or we just leave all that up to U of I?
That's up to the house owner, actually. They're privately owned housing buildings, privately owned rooming houses, sororities, fraternities are all privately owned, so it's up to them to do that using their own finances.
Okie dokie.
So you mentioned Busey Evans, that's a dorm. We don't
I know-
have,
I know it's a dorm.
we don't inspect dorms.
That's what I was asking, if they did dorms, or if they, or if it was just frat houses and sorority houses.
These are private homes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Privately owned
I mean, some are private, or some are sororities, some are fraternities, some are privately owned properties. So, but again, not all sororities or fraternities are part of certified housing. Certified housing basically is where the freshmen are allowed to stay.
Where the freshmen are allowed to stay. Thank you for defining that for me. Okay.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor made by Jared, seconded by Eric. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Roll call would be.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Okay. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Council members Brown?
Yes.
Hazen, or Hersey?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
And Wu.
Yes.
That resolution passes. Last items on the agenda are appointments to boards and commissions. Appointment, I'm going to take the appointments as a group and then the reappointments as a group. For the UC2B Board, Paul Hickson, term to expire August 1st, 2022. For Champaign County Economic Development Corporation Board, Brandon Boyes, Economic Development Manager, and Brandon will be president of the board, actually. For the Urbana Business Association Board, Rachel Storm, who's our current Arts and Culture Coordinator, and for the Visit Champaign County Board, Bridget Broyhan, who's our Communications Specialist.
I'll move approval of those appointments.
A second.
Moved by Jared, seconded by Sharice. Will all those in favor please say aye?
Aye.
All those opposed? That motion passes. Reappointments to the Fireman's Pension Board Fund Board of Trustees, the term ending June 30th, 2021. Richard Schnauer, and Police Pension Fund Board, I believe this is a 2-year term as well. That's not the correct date there, but that would be Elizabeth Hannon. That's June 30th, 2021. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll move approval.
Second.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. That motion passes. Last on the agenda is the
Closed minutes.
Resolution 2019-08-030R, which is a resolution regarding the release of closed session minutes for the period ending June 30th, 2019.
Move approval.
Second.
Actually, this also needs a suspension of the rules.
Oh, I'd move to suspend the resolution on resolutions to allow a vote on this resolution.
Is there a second? Moved by Jared, seconded by Mary Alice. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Okay. Is there a motion for the resolution?
I'll make a resolution for number 2019-08-030R, resolution regarding the release of closed sessions minutes for the period ending June 30th, 2019 for approval.
I'll second the motion.
Motion by Mary Alice, second by Bill. Any discussion? Is this a
Roll call.
roll call?
Councilmember Brown?
Yes.
Hersey?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
And Wu.
Yes.
That motion passes. With no further business before the council, we are adjourned.